Welcome, everybody. My name is Kathy Ongiri, and I serve as lead staff to the Judicial Council's Advisory Committee on Providing Access and Fairness. Thank you for joining us today. I want to welcome you to a fireside chat on judicial diversity yesterday. This is the first of our pre-sessions leading up to Stronger Together, Judicial Diversity Summit 2021. The Judicial Diversity Summit is co-sponsored by the Judicial Council of California, California Lawyers Association, and the California Judges Association, and has been held every 5 years since 2006. The summit seeks to assess the efforts to increase judicial diversity in California and to make recommendations for future activities and initiatives to diversify the judiciary. Today, we're here to reflect on the work that led to the initial summit and the tremendous progress made over the past 15 years. So on the panel today, we have some pioneers or trailblazers. We have some legal giants that were really instrumental in raising the issue of judicial diversity throughout the state and guiding its course. I'm very excited to welcome Judge Brenda Harbin-Forte, Ruthe Ashley, and Pat Lee to discuss how the Judicial Diversity Summit came to be and to reflect on all the progress that we've made in California as a leader in this area. So I just want to give a really quick background on our speakers. Now, keep in mind that there's no way for me to do justice to their extensive careers in this short time. I could probably spend the whole hour talking to you about all the accomplishments that our panelists have achieved through their legal careers. So I'm just gonna keep it brief. So Ruthe Ashley has been committed to diversity in the profession her entire legal career. She's been called an arsonist, lighting diversity fires, especially connected to the pipeline for the last 25 years. Her pipeline work started at the national level with the ABA in 2001. Now today, she's retired from the active practice of law, but volunteers almost full time continuing to build the diversity pipeline at a statewide and national level. Now, Ms. Ashley has received numerous awards and honors over the course of her distinguished career. And the same can be said for our next panelist, Judge Brenda Harbin-Forte. She retired from the Superior Court of Alameda County in 2019 after serving more than 27 years as a judge. She's worked tirelessly on efforts to diversify the judiciary and the bar and led the efforts to convene our first summit, which you'll hear about a little bit more later. Now, she's not content to remain idle in retirement. She recently was appointed by Oakland's Mayor, Libby Schaaf, to serve on the Oakland Police Commission, and she also serves on the State Bar's Commission on Judicial Nominees Evaluations, the Jenny Commission, which evaluates all candidates seeking the governor's appointment to the bench. Lastly, last but not least, I should say, actually, we have Pat Lee, who retired as a special assistant for diversity and bar relations at the State Bar of California. In that capacity, she served as the liaison to the State Bar's Council on Access and Fairness, which is the State Bar's diversity think tank, and worked on addressing issues along the diversity pipeline through a variety of initiatives covering high school law academies, community college and undergraduate pathways, bar exam issues, legal employer practices, and judicial diversity. Now, prior to that position, she actually served 2 separate times as the director of the State Bar's Office of Legal Services, Access and Fairness Programs. In her retirement, she's not taking it easy either. She's currently the chair of the ABA Standing Committee on Public Education. And immediately before that, she served as the chair of the ABA Center for Diversity and Inclusion and the chair of the ABA Advisory Council for Diversity and Inclusion. She's also received numerous honors and awards over the course of her career. Now, before I introduce you to and turn it over to our moderator, I want to do just a really quick bit of housekeeping. As participants, we really want you to be engaged. And if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A function, and our panelists will be answering as many as they can at the end of the program. Now, this program will be recorded for future use. And now I want to turn it over to our moderator, Tristan Higgins. She's been an attorney for 24 years and has been dedicated to equity and representation for her entire life. She's worked as a prosecutor, a union attorney, an entertainment attorney, and spent a decade with Sony Electronics doing international entertainment and high-tech transactions and high-value deals. Now she helps organize and develop workplaces where employees feel like they belong. Tristan also serves as the chair of the Diversity Outreach Advisory Council for the California Lawyers Association. Tristan, take it away.
I do?
I'm sorry, incoming okay. Chair.
I think I got a promotion. Thank you so much, Kathy. As Kathy just said, my name is Tristan Higgins. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm absolutely delighted and honored to be able to be here today to talk with these 4 amazing women and these 3 panelists who really are the trailblazers in creating the judicial diversity that we have on our bench in California so far. So we have a packed program, and I'm going to keep us moving. We're going to start with the types of diversity, the status of diversity in California before we had our first summit in 2006. So Ruthe, I want to come to you, and I'd like to ask you to give us the lay of the land before the first Judicial Summit.
Thank you so much, Tristan. We're just honored to be here and really honored to share what has become a life for the 3 of us who are on this panel. But to understand judicial diversity, I've really got to go all the way back to where I got very, very much involved with it. In 2001, as Kathy said, at the ABA, there was created the very first pipeline council, which was called at that time the Presidential Advisory Council on Diversity in the Profession. And it was supposed to be the pipeline, the very first pipeline, the first time we used that word to mean something other than gas and oil. It was the first time I had heard that word. And when I sat in there as an honorary member, I was president-elect of the National Asian Pacific American Bar Association at that time. And I was honored to be one of the honorary members for that first council. And at that time, the pipeline went back in educational diversity just to law school. And that was the first time we did that. And we started doing research on what was important. We were doing research at McGeorge School of Law with Dean Elizabeth Rinskoff Parker when she created a program that sent law students to the local high school students to talk about mentoring and to help mentor the local high school students. We had several national conferences. The first one I remember was in 2005 when the ABA hosted at Rice University in Houston and brought about 100 diversity professionals from all over the country to talk about the pipeline and to talk about what we needed to know about the pipeline. At that time, we did just extend to law school, but our research showed that the achievement gap was in 4th grade and that we needed to go back, all the way back to preschool if we could. In 2004, I was privileged again to be on the State Bar Board of Governors. At that time, our president, one of the men who was running for president was Jim Hiding. He went around talking to all the people who could vote for him to be president the next year. And he asked me, what's important to you, Ruthe? And I said, the pipeline. And he says to me, what the H is the pipeline? And I sat him down and I said, okay, Jim, let's talk about the pipeline and how it is not gas and oil. It is not gas and oil. No, it is the educational diversity pipeline. It's the new language for what we do. That year, he asked us to create, and he asked me to chair, a project that was called the Diversity Pipeline Task Force. We brought in 100 professionals from across the state of California to look at the diversity pipeline with the purpose of looking at all current and ongoing pipeline projects across the nation, starting in preschool and going all the way to the judiciary. We had 4 groups, and those 4 groups included what we started to call the Judiciary Working Group. I remember at that time, as we were putting our group together and bringing our people in, we needed chairs for each of these groups. And I'm going to tell a story about Brenda Harbin-Forte, which she's heard a lot, and I embarrassed her about it, but it's a very true story. I called her and I said, Judge Brenda, I don't know you, but I've heard that you're fabulous. Will you be the chair of this committee? And she says, no, you don't want me. No, I don't have the time. And Pat Lee and I had convinced her that she was the perfect chair for this. Well, she did take that chairship. And as we did this diversity pipeline task force, I remember Judge Brenda calling me one day as she sent her committee out to look at all the programs that were ongoing or current, focused on judicial diversity across the country. She comes back to me in a few days and she says, Ruthe, we have been on the phone. We have been on what the internet was then, and we've been looking everywhere, and we cannot find anything across the country that is focused on judicial diversity. What are we going to do? And I sat back and I thought, what? 2006, nothing? And so I said to Judge Brenda, well, the only thing we can do is start at the beginning. And that is to educate and to inform and see what the issues are out there. And I think we've gotten up to that task force. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Tristan, and see if you want me to keep on going, or where do you want me to focus?
Well, I want to know if Judge Brenda said yes.
Well, clearly she said yes, because here she is. We put her to work and we haven't let her off the hook yet. And it's been 15 years.
Lucky for us. Let's have, I think if we have Lauren with us, I think we want to show some slides, Ruthe. I'm going to ask you to give us some of the numbers to back up what we were just going through. Hopefully Lauren can make that happen. Sweet. Isn't that amazing? All right, excellent. Ruthe, can you walk us through, I know we have 3 slides here, and for anybody who's curious, these will be available after the presentation, and they may actually already be in the chat if you want to grab them. So thank you, Ruthe.
Absolutely. And we're not going to go take a too deep a dive here because we'll be talking about this more. But these are the numbers that we have. If you look at the blue bar in 2006, when we started to count, and Brenda will tell you more about how we counted and what we had to do, but the numbers of the population. But what's important is the brown bar and the purple bar. And look at the different ethnic groups, the white, African American, Asian Pacific Islander, and Latino. And what the Judicial Council looked like in terms of ethnic diversity in 2006 versus 2020, which is the brown bar versus the purple bar. So you see that the white population of judges dropped a bit, and there's growth. There's growth in African Americans, Asian Pacific Islanders, and Latinos. So that's the good news. The bad news is there's still a lot of work to do, but there has been some growth. It's been quite a bit of work in 15 years. And let's go to the next slide so we can talk about gender.
Great, thank you.
The next slide talks about our gender diversity in California courts, and you can see that the population in 2010 and in 2006 is quite comparative, men and women. But you can see the difference in 2006 with the brown bar and 2020 with the purple bar, the differences in how many women were on the bench and how many men were on the bench. So there has been a change. There has been increases in the number of women. We've gone from 27.1% to 37.6% in 15 years. So it's 10 percentage points. It's good, but it's not great. And we still have lots of work to do in the gender diversity area. Next
and do we
slide.
also keep, yep, excellent, next slide.
And this is the slide on LGBTQ veterans and disability. The reason that we have different colors here is the first numbers weren't done for LGBTQ lawyers until 2011. And that is a 2.2%, the JC report in 2011. And again in 2020, where it's grown about 2%. The next one is about veterans. The first time we did a veteran count or a disability count again was in 2014. So it was later, much later than the other ethnicities and the women numbers that we had. But you can see that the numbers there have changed a little, but they're really still minuscule. Veterans 0.3 up now to 2.8, and disability 0.1 and 1.1. I'll have to say for the LGBTQ arena, this is self-selected or self-identified. So we do need to work on those numbers, and we do need to work in all these areas for increasing diversity in the profession.
Thank you so much, Ruthe, for that. And we can stop sharing now for our master of behind the scenes. Judge Brenda, I'm going to come over to you, and I'd like to know for you to tell us why it was important to you that we have a summit, not a magazine or an article, but a summit. Why was a summit important? And as we have to say in every seminar, we've got a mute button. So save your brilliance.
And of
There we go.
course, thank you very much.
I don't have to.
I want to thank you for inviting me to participate on this panel. I'm looking forward to this. I want to follow up a little bit in terms of Ruthe. When I said yes to Ruthe that time, that began a lifelong bad habit of mine of saying yes to anything that Ruthe ever asked me to do. So she's not only persuasive, but she knows how to hook you in and reel you in. But I was honored to accept the position to chair that working group. And I want to say too that one of the reasons we wanted to hold a summit is that we were called a courts working group, and we felt that we were in a crisis situation when it came to diversity on the bench. There were simply not enough judges of color who were getting appointed to the bench, not enough women, and none were actually getting appointed. The future did not look optimistic for diversity on the bench, and qualified judges of color were being overlooked. I'll give you one example, which is Alameda County. Before we started the summit, so in and around 2006, the governor had not appointed any African-American judge in Alameda County in over 2 years, although he had made 5 appointments to that bench. And one of them was an appointment to fill a seat that became vacant after an African-American judge retired. So we had 5 judges over 2 years, no African-Americans. There were 3 vacancies in Alameda County, and no one was in the pipeline to get appointed. So it appeared that we were not going to not only were we not going to replace the African-American judge who had left the bench, but we were not going to get any African-American appointees. And that was true around the state for all judges of color. So we were troubled by that. We just weren't getting appointed. It was an issue of public trust and confidence in the court system as well, and an issue of equal access to justice for all Californians. The Judicial Council had issued a report in 2005 on public trust and confidence in the courts. And one thing that it showed was that all races, Caucasians, not just African Americans, but Caucasians, APIs, Latino, all races felt that African Americans received worse outcomes in the court system than any other ethnic group. So it was a matter, and the perception was that was unfair, and it was a perception that was held by others. Equal access to justice was very important for us in having this first summit. One of the things we realized, though, was that we had to get the entire legal community to realize that this was a serious problem that needed to be addressed. Now, we had the Ethnic Judges Associations at the table. We had the African American Judges Association. It was the Judicial Council of the California Association of Black Lawyers. We had the Latino judges available at the table, and we had the Asian Pacific American Judges Associations also at the table. So we were there, and we had a very diverse group of the court members of the court's working group. The membership is in the materials in the 2007 report of the Diversity Pipeline Task Force. So we had them, but we needed to make sure that we brought everybody to the table, a broad range of people to the table, so that we could do what we needed to do to diversify our bench. So that is why we needed to have a summit. The only way to do it was to call everybody together. I'm going to share one thing quickly, Tristan. When I sent the invitation letter to the judges to attend, I said to them, "You're invited, indeed implored, to attend the first of two critical statewide conferences being convened to discuss diversity in the California courts." I went on to say that as the demographics of California change, it is imperative that our judiciary reflects the diversity of our communities. Currently, racial and ethnic minorities make up a majority of the state's population, but they comprise less than 15% of California's judiciary. So we said, come together, let's meet, let's talk about how we can increase diversity in the court system. And we got a very positive response to that invitation.
Wow.
Thank you.
I love that you shared that. I mean, it's like we're talking about the Mississippi River, but at the tiny little spot where it starts, right? That's what we're talking about today. Pat, I want to ask you, so we understand why we needed to have a summit. I'd like to ask you, what did you hope to achieve with that first summit? What kinds of things were you hoping to accomplish? And we need to get you off of mute.
Sorry.
Oh, no problem.
So as Judge Brenda said, we all understood the sense of urgency when we looked at the report from the courts working group, the barriers, the lack of diversity and so forth. So we wanted to bring together a wide range of stakeholders to be sure that we were all on the same page as we move forward in trying to increase diversity among the judiciary. We wanted to be sure that the stakeholders were willing to engage in open and candid discussion, acknowledging the lack of diversity and the importance of judicial diversity in terms of public confidence and fairness in the judicial system. And we wanted the discussion groups around the recommended solutions also to be really candid and creative so that they would report out the next steps in terms of an action plan and be willing to look at outcomes and also to recommend that we have a future judicial summit to continue with the momentum. We wanted to be sure we were all on the same page in defining diversity so that we had the same demographic groups in all of our reports, our discussion and so forth, so we could compare statistics and demographics. And we wanted to be sure that the numbers that we gathered provided a factual understanding of the landscape. We wanted to be sure that there was sufficient demographic data on total applications as well as appointments, on the breakdown of Jenny rankings of the applicants that they reviewed, a demographic data on all sitting judges in the state at all different levels, Supreme Court, Court of Appeals, and trial courts. And we also wanted the data to be in raw numbers as well as percentages. Initial reports indicated percentages in terms of demographic groups, and you either had to do some kind of backwards calculation or you had to call the entity for the raw numbers. So we wanted the raw numbers to be on the report as well as the percentages, because sometimes percentages are misleading and you have to look at the raw numbers to get the true sense of what's happening. And the ultimate goal too was to get everyone to agree that the goal for judicial diversity was to align with the state demographics and not the demographics of the state bar membership.
So for those of us that weren't there in the room where it happened, as it were, I see. Okay, good. At least one of you several of you get my Hamilton reference. Can you, Pat, staying with you, can you give us some insight into what the first summit was like? Was it crowded? Was it hectic? You know, what was discussed? Just some thoughts on what was happening that first day.
Okay, so as I said, we all knew it was an urgent task that we had, and we agreed that we needed to find some ability to convene the stakeholders to focus on these issues. And fortunately for us, at that time, the state bar held not only annual meetings, but they had a mid-year meeting, and the mid-year meeting that year was focusing on diversity. So we were able to get the permission to tack on a judicial summit to that spring diversity summit, which was fortunate for us because on the last day of that summit, there was a vacant ballroom. And so we had it was a short timeline to get the word out, but because of the urgency and the interest among the stakeholders and our partners, that we got feedback. The room limit was 125 individuals. That filled up right away. We had people trickling in. We had standing room all around the edges of the room, and we probably could have filled the ballroom twice the size, just given the interest and the people that we had to say, sorry, you can't come in because we have a limitation on the room. We wanted to be sure that we had all the stakeholders represented. So we invited and were able to succeed in inviting the representatives from the governor's office, the legislature, the Judicial Council, the State Bar leadership, the Jenny Commission, the local affinity and specialty bar associations, private bar, government offices, public interest, academia, community groups, and so forth. We wanted everybody in the room, not just quote unquote the choir. We had the summit program speakers featured judicial and bar leaders. We had the governor's judicial appointments advisor, government official reps. The keynote was provided by Justice Ron George at the time. Opening remarks were by State Bar President Jim Heiding. Justice Jim Lambden was chair of the Judicial Council Access and Fairness Advisory Committee. And Judge Brenda and Ruthe also were key speakers and facilitators for the conference. The opening panel focused on identifying the barriers. We took the barriers that were identified in the working group report, which the lack of data collection, official statistics on diversity, and a lack of establishing a baseline so we could evaluate progress. There was a lack of transparency at all levels of the appointments and screening process, so that had to be addressed at the Jenny Review Commission, county bar evaluation committees, and the governor's screening committees as well. At that time, when we looked at the data for appointments, everybody realized that there was a great emphasis on jury trial experience. So we wanted to move away from that and encourage all screening entities to expand the qualifications for applicants beyond just jury trial experience, because everybody recognized that it's really hard to get jury trial experience to the level that was being requested on the application. And then also we noticed that criminal defense attorneys had sufficient jury trial experience, but they were somehow viewed as having lesser qualifications as opposed to the prosecution side. So they weren't being appointed as much as possible, so that the appointment entities were losing out on a large pool of diverse attorneys who were engaged in criminal defense work. In terms of recruitment, there need to be a greater outreach and recruitment approach, and need for judges especially to be involved in outreach and education, especially among the youth and in terms of the education pipeline. We had breakouts to look at all of those aspects, and the final panel focused on what we call the call to action. And basically they identified the priorities. They basically supported the need for us to create a call to action in terms of an action plan over the next 5 years, and to look at the outcomes and report out at an upcoming future judicial summit.
Wow. What I love about that is that it was sort of last minute because of the urgency, but the caliber of the people that you were still able to get and the number of people, that's really encouraging. Let me just ask Ruthe or Judge Brenda, would either of you like to add anything about that first summit, sort of the nitty gritty of the day? Y'all have to unmute. Let me just save you that.
I would. And when you're talking about the urgency, our first meeting for the Diversity Pipeline Task Force was in January. And this summit took place in June, 6 months. So from the time we had our first meeting, and of course there were 3 other groups working on 3 other areas of the pipeline. And this is the courts working group. They were all ahead of their time. They had all had drive-by dinners. The other 3 groups had really been focused on the issues of the pipeline and diversity. And so the reason that the judicial group they were the only ones to have a summit was because they had to start at the beginning. And I know that Judge Brenda and Pat remember that one time, Pat said that we had the judicial appointments secretary there with us. At that time, it was John Davies. And all of you who have planned conferences, you know that you don't know who's gonna show up until the day of. And I remember walking into that room and barely being able to squeeze past all these people standing around that were allowed to stand and coming in. And I got there in time for somebody to ask John Davies, who was on that panel at that time, so can you tell us, Sir Secretary, is diversity something that the governor is focused on? Does the governor think about diversity on the bench? Is that a factor? And we all waited with bated breath. And the answer was, no, that's not something we consider at all. You could hear a pin drop as we looked at each other And we went, that's the call. That's the clarion call that we needed. That was what started the ball really rolling. You remember that? We were all just, really?
Well, and that can't be the only sort of negative or, disappointing thing that you heard. Judge Brenda, as you were preparing for the summit, did you anticipate other pushback? Did you do anything to prepare for it? Or did you take any actions to address it?
Oh, yes, we anticipated pushback. We anticipated major pushback. Nobody wanted to talk about race. Nobody wanted to talk about diversity. Nobody wanted to have any suggestion that there was any racism in the judicial system. So we knew we would have pushback. And I'm going to tell people as well as you go through the materials, the program from the first summit is in your materials to show who was involved and who was in the panel. But yes, and in terms of the planning. We started planning that summit in March. And I remember at one of our meetings in March of 2006, I remember at one of our meetings, Judge Lodoris Cordell said, listen, this is an emergency. We don't have enough representation on the bench. It is shameful the way that our benches look. And she said, we need to treat this as an emergency. How soon can we get a summit together? And so Pat looked around and kind of like, okay, 3 months is June. We can try the meeting then. And so that's what happened. We were able to try to pull together the summit. But we knew that there would be resistance. We knew that there would be, and there were claims, this is affirmative action and you just want to appoint unqualified people of color to the bench, as though diversity and qualifications were somehow mutually exclusive concepts. So we had to meet that kind of resistance. And serendipitously, though, some members of the legislature were also very, very concerned about judicial diversity. And Speaker of the Assembly, Fabian Nunez, who's a Latino, and his General Counsel, Frederica McGee, an African-American woman attorney, they were encouraging courts to increase diversity on the bench. There was pending legislation, a request from the Administrative Office of the Courts at that time and the Judicial Council to add some additional judgeships. And Nunez and McGee were both saying, we need some more diversity. We need a commitment from the judiciary. We also knew that just talking about diversity was not going to be enough, so that we needed to show pictures. And in fact, that's what we did. And I'm not sure, I think I neglected to send the slide deck that we showed at the first summit. But what we did was to go through and we showed all of the counties in California that had high ethnic minority populations and sometimes no ethnic minority judge on that bench. Caucasians were overrepresented in all of the 58 counties in California. The other thing that we did was that with respect to planning for the summit, we thought when we started out with this courts working group, okay, we just called up the Judicial Council, the Administrative Office of the courts, and we'll just say, hey, how many Black, how many African American, how many Latinos, how many API judges do you have on the bench? There were no statistics. There were no official statistics. So what we ended up having to do was to hand count the judges. So we all got together, the judges groups, the affinity judges groups. We sent out surveys, phone calls, emails. How many do you have? How many do you have? How many do you have? And that's how we came with some preliminary numbers. It was pretty outrageous. So we had to do all of that. But one of the other things is that we needed, and by the way, when we showed those slides, the room was very quiet. I mean, it was just so dramatic. And so we showed county after county where there was such underrepresentation. And it was very hard. We could almost say, okay, we rest our case. I think people are getting it. But we also wanted to make sure we left the summit with an action plan. We wanted an action plan. We didn't want this to be a summit with a report that just gathered dust. We wanted to make sure that we could have some measurable outcomes and we'd have some way to track any success. So, and by the way, with respect to those slides shown at the first summit, I will send them to CLA, and if they're not there, you can supplement the accessibility to it.
Thank you, Judge Brenda.
Thank you.
I had to laugh thinking, around the table, okay, I need all of the white lesbians to raise their hand. Okay, that's me, and okay, do we have any Latinx? So I love that.
That's that's kind of
have to
what
be
it
that way.
was. Yeah,
Yeah.
kind of what it was. And we
Yes.
couldn't, you couldn't ask people about, sexual orientation or anything then. And many people were understandably in 2005, they were not out.
Right.
So it was very difficult. The first summit was also focused on racial and ethnic diversity, and we had some stats on women, some hand counted stats on women. But our next summit was going to focus on women, and eventually we did make a lot of progress on that front as well.
You were sharing with me in prep that you were looking through the lists like, oh, okay, Leslie, is that a man judge?
Exactly.
And
That's what we were going, as we were trying to count how many men and how many women. And what you'll see in the report were at least our guesstimates of how many men and women were on a particular county's bench. And so we were like, and so sometimes we'd have to call up somebody and say, hey, do you know Leslie Smith? Is that a man or a woman? Oh, that's a man or a woman. So it was, and then, for the Latinos, we're all very organized. The Black judges are all very organized in the sense that we had membership lists. So we could kind of figure out who, but we didn't have all of the names. And in addition, we still did not have any kind of official stats. We sort of knew informally. And then even with respect to those, well, I'll talk about that later on.
Okay. So let me go over to Ruthe. So get you ready. Oh, you're off mute. All right. Will you please, I love this one. Will you please share with us the most exciting thing about that first summit?
Well, as Brenda said, the numbers were shocking. And when we showed the numbers, it really shone a spotlight on the lack of diversity on the bench. And that was the impetus to start working. That was the impetus for the legislature and Frederica McGee, who was there to start working with the legislature. It was the impetus to start so many things. And when I think back on that first summit and all the people that were there, it was a wake-up call for all of us. It was a call for all of us who had been doing diversity work for the last decade or two, that there was a huge part of our profession that needed to have a focus that we hadn't been focused on. Yes, we'd been focused on practicing lawyers, but we hadn't been focused on the bench. And if we don't have diversity in the practice, we're not going to have diversity in the bench, but we could still do so much more to reach out and to be inclusive and to be a place for belonging for all judges of all colors and of all genders and of sexual orientation. So really, it was a wake-up call to all of us that we had not been seeing a huge problem that was there. It started a mandate to file annual demographic reports. It led the State Bar to create the Council on Access and Fairness, which we'll talk about later. It led the law schools to examine barriers to admissions and retention of law students of color. It led the State Bar to examine the bar admission process. So it started so many things because we saw that we had a big area and an area where a lot of people want to end up that we really needed to look at and change and inspire the future to become judges and judges of color.
Wow. Okay. So Judge Brenda, I know it's hard to follow Ruthe with her passion, but let me ask you about some of the specifics. So give us general action items about the action items that were generated by the first summit. Can you give us some of those kinds of things that were decided to work on? And we got to get you off of mute.
Here I go again. I was really going to be unmuted before Ruthe finished, but oh well, sorry. Okay, sorry about that. But Ruthe has a way of just, mesmerizing you with her speaking. So I forget what I'm supposed to do. But in any event, there are a few things that were important to us, and we wanted some work on and we had recommendations on. One of them was visibility of judges and community involvement. We really wanted to make sure that judges got out into the communities, let the communities know that they're out, that they're there, they're involved, and to mentor and support law students starting actually elementary school because we were covering the entire pipeline, but let them know about the legal profession and encourage them to join the bench eventually. There was outreach to high schools and to other educational institutions. We wanted judges to mentor people along the way, groom someone, identify people, start them on the path, have them come to your chambers, have them do whatever you can to get them involved. We wanted, the most important thing that we wanted was data collection. And that was incredibly important because, again, as I said, we had no official statistics. When we had the summit, the SB 56 that we'll talk about later on had not mandated official statistics, demographic reports, but we wanted demographic reports. And interestingly, at the summit, we wanted it not just for judges, we wanted information on commissioners as well. You had family law commissioners, you had traffic commissioners, you had juvenile court commissioners, all of them who were making decisions about a diverse group of citizens litigants coming into their courts, and we had no idea what the diversity of those subordinate judicial officers was. So we wanted to know what can we do. We wanted demographics, we wanted official information, we wanted data collection on all of those things, and that was just very, very important for us. I will say one of the other things that we wanted in terms of just we didn't want just data and demographics on race and ethnicity and gender, but we also wanted, and one of the recommendations that came out of it was for, at the time, there was no requirement that there be reports on LGBTQ members of the community or disabled or veterans. But we wanted to find out if people could voluntarily disclose. We wanted the Judicial Council to ask judges to voluntarily disclose so we could see what that level of diversity was among the bench as well. So I have to say that we had big dreams. We had really, really big dreams. We wanted so much, and we were able to see the potential for really achieving diversity on the bench. If they just do these things, if they just start and just have the courage as well to do it. Sure, there's pushback. There's always and has been. I got nasty emails and everything about stuff, but you know, you do what you think is right. And sometimes when you have been given an opportunity to be at a table, you try to make a difference there, try to make the world a better place while you're at that table. So that was it. And again, as you will explain, all of the recommendations out of that first summit and the further work of the Courts Working Group are in the Courts Working Group's final report that will be accessible to attendees.
Excellent. And to make sure that the amazing aspirations created at that summit were not just dreams or dusty dreams sitting on the shelf, Ruthe, I'd like to ask, what kinds of actions did you take to ensure that there was follow through on the items that Judge Brenda just highlighted for us?
I want to give a shout out to the leadership of the State Bar at that time. Judge Judy Johnson, who is now retired, was the executive director at that time. And when you're working on issues of diversity that aren't popular, and they're never popular, they're getting more popular now, but when you're doing that, you need a champion who can make things happen. And Judge Judy Johnson was the one that said to me, go ahead and do it. And to Pat, she assigned Pat as a special assistant for diversity and really got a person who was focused on diversity, reporting to the executive director of the State Bar. So when we wanted to institutionalize the work of the Diversity Pipeline Task Force, including the Courts Working Group. See, Brenda, I called it the Courts Working Group. Originally, we called it the Judiciary Working Group, but Brenda says we're going to call it the Courts Working Group.
Potato.
To institutionalize that, including the work from the summit, what we wanted to do was to bring everyone together into a think tank, a group, one group that would focus on diversity for the entire state and spread it to the nation. We had to sunset 4 committees at that time and talk about pushback. We sent out public comment and gave them 3 months to give us public comment and to write and to email and to call us. And I spent 3 months on the phone, sometimes 2 to 3 hours a day, explaining what the concept was and calming nerves down and listening to upset lawyers, because we were going to sunset their committees, especially the new leadership that was coming in. And we had, I remember the big stakeholder meeting where the Board of Governors voted, and people had a chance to come in and talk for 2 hours and talk about what was good and what was bad. And finally, the Board of Governors voted in the Council on Access and Fairness. And we were so happy that it happened. We sent out an invitation to become a member of that, and we received 100 applications back. I remember Bob Hawley and I going back and forth. I wanted 30 members on the task force. He wanted 10 on the council. And we would negotiate back and forth and back and forth. And finally, Judy came to my rescue and said, give her 25. She can have 25. And so we had 25 members of that first commission, the leadership of diversity, the leadership of the bar, the leadership of the bench, who came in and were ready to do the work. That's how we institutionalize the work of the Diversity Pipeline Task Force, by creating the Council on Access and Fairness. It has become the leader in diversity across the nation. It has produced so much good work. We'll tell you where it is now. It's not now where we were hoping it would be, but it was then. And we had some great support and some great projects that produced things like the Pathway and the Diversity Summits, and continued to work on diversity in the legal profession.
Thank you, Ruthe. Now, before we get to some of the exciting outcomes of 2011 and 2016, Judge Brenda, I'd like to ask you to tell us about Senate Bill 56, which was codified at Government Code Section 12011.5. We will be including a page on this section in the materials, which I believe Lauren has shared at least a couple of times. Judge Brenda, can you tell us about that? What was that about? Or is it about?
Sure. And thank you. And Judy and Ruthe mentioned the formation of COAF. I was honored to be tapped by the Board of Governors to serve as the first chair of COAF, so that I was thrilled to be able to continue the work of the courts working group. And we had a group solely dedicated to judicial diversity. It was amazing. But in terms of Senate Bill 56, that legislation was pending when we had the summit in June of 2006. And again, one of the things was that it was going to address was whether the courts would get at least 50 new judgeships. The request was for I think a total of 150 over the course of time, but 50 was sort of on the table. And so that legislation did permit 50 new judgeships, but it required annual demographic reports from the Judicial Council, from the Jenny, and from the governor's office, so that we would have what we wanted at the summit, and which was to be able to go and find officially what level of diversity we could find on the bench. It was just for judges. It still wasn't for commissioners, but that was another project. And with respect to those annual judicial count, those annual demographics, I will say that the Judicial Council then had to survey its membership, the judges, and say, will you tell us your race or ethnicity, your gender? That didn't go over real well with a large group of judges. Yes, I think that probably close to 30% or something refused to admit to declare their race and ethnicity. They were insulted, and they basically said, go pound sand. It's none of your business, and I don't make my decisions based on race or whatever. And so we did not get the Judicial Council, Administrative Officer of the courts, did not get the highest response rate. I think they probably got maybe 100% in terms of identifying gender. So people were comfortable in terms of saying whether they were male or female, but their race or ethnicity. And then they were like, well, I'm mixed. Some were like, I'm mixed. And others were like, I'm just not going to tell you. I think that that now probably we certainly have, there's probably at least more than 90% response rate now in terms of when I say response rate, that now the demographic reports probably show close to 90%. of people responding, or if not closer to 100. But that's what SB 56 did for us. We also wanted to, we knew that there was no visibility in the Jenny process at all. So this legislation, in addition to requiring the annual reports, it also provided the groundwork for later amendments to the government code. And SB 56, by the way, is codified in the government code section 12011.1.5. But it also laid the groundwork for later amendments to that government code section to require, for example, Jenny training on various things, on implicit bias, and also on other aspects. And eventually it was amended as well to require collection of data on LGBTQ plus, on veterans, and on judges who have disabilities. So we were able to, that was, I think, the 2011 and perhaps 2014 amendments that required that, that information. So it was an incredible, and also along the way later on, there was another another statute that allowed for 50 more judgeships that'll be in our timeline, although those judgeships were not funded. But it was such a seminal piece of legislation. It was carried by SB 56 was the bill by Joe Don, who ended up eventually being the executive director of the state bar. But it was great. That's it. We owe much to SB 56. We owe much to people like Frederica McGee and Fabian Nunez, other members of the legislature, others who said, we have to do something to ensure diversity on the bench.
Well, and I'd like to add, sort of moderator privilege, that I think we owe much to the three of you, because if I'm not mistaken, that bill was generated from the report that you came up with out of that first summit. So thank you.
All right. And if I can correct, I'm sorry, that bill was pending before our summit. So it was before our summit. It got passed based with the demographic information was imposed as a result of our summit. So, so the request for a demographic was imposed as a request as a result of what was shown at the summit, because everybody, and we had members of legislative staff and members of the legislature there at the summit, and who were like, "What do you mean we don't have official demographics on what our bench looks like?" So yes, so that part of it, yes, was a direct result of our summit and the level of diversity and the problems we had with lack of transparency on Jenny and those other things. So it informed the final iteration of the bill.
Okay, I sit corrected, but
all right. Yeah. I just wanted to
still
say,
synonymous in my book.
Yes, it was already there, but what they saw and what they learned at the summit was kind of like, okay, this is the way we'll do it. You get the judgeships, but you're going to give us something in return.
Yes. Okay, well, let's go to Pat. Pat, I want to ask you, we're running a little bit behind, but I know everybody wants to hear about the really the results of the 2011 and 2016 summits. And you don't need to include all of them, but please give us some of the highlights of the things that came out of the 2011 summit first.
Okay, just very briefly, the 2011 summit tracked the barriers and challenges that were identified in the court's working group report. So we worked from there initially with the 2006 summit and continued to focus on those barriers and challenges and made progress in almost all of them. In terms of judicial appointments and elections, with the appointment of COAF, we managed to begin presenting judicial appointments workshops throughout the state, and also mentoring workshops for attorneys who had completed a draft of their applications for judges and former Jenny commissioners to provide feedback so that they could beef up their applications and be in a best possible position for consideration by the governor and the Jenny Commission. The State Bar and the Judicial Council created the Judicial Diversity Toolkit that was for use by judges throughout the state to recruit diverse attorneys, and it was revised in 2019. And we were successful in getting the governor to designate a point person in his office as the person responsible for judicial appointments. Even though it wasn't an official separate position, it was a point person that we could all relate to and have conversations with. The leaky pipeline, the early education pipeline, importance of that in terms of feeding diverse students and attorneys into the pipeline was beefed up. I don't recall if Ruthe mentioned this, but she was instrumental in working with the Department of Education for us to get funding for high school partnership law academies, the first ones in the state, 6 at that time, now up to about 25, 26 throughout the state. What it does is it focuses on educating students in the high schools about the justice system, what the possible careers there are in the law, and to provide them with the critical thinking skills that all attorneys need. And that's really a successful program at this point in time.
And if I can just jump in, it's so successful, in fact, that on August 25th, we're going to be having an entire panel as part of the summit on the kinds of efforts that the judiciary is taking in that pipeline early outreach. So thank you again for starting that work. Please proceed, Pat.
Okay, great. And judges, just thank to all the judges who volunteer in all those programs throughout the state. We're thankful for them to be involved, not only in volunteering as mentors and classroom speakers, but also on the advisory councils for all those high school law academies. Data collection progressed as Brenda mentioned with the passage of SB 56. And as the 2011 summit, that's when we added a sexual orientation, disability, and veteran status as categories to be included in those reports. The Jenny Commission received training from the Council on Access and Fairness and Implicit Bias. And the governor encouraged and provided training we encouraged the governor to provide similar training for his screening committees, and they did provide that kind of training. One of the major accomplishments was that we provided feedback to the governor's office for concerns with the online application. At that time, the application was timing out. It's a long application. It's hard to fill it out, even if you know what you're going to put in there. It was timing out, so people could not complete it. Then they had to go back and start all over again. They couldn't save entries. They couldn't return to a prior completed section. They couldn't complete sections in a random order. They had to reduce the number of mandatory sections and specific dates that they were requesting in the application. And they had to accommodate persons with disabilities by allowing them to submit hard copies of that application. All of those concerns were addressed in a positive way by the governor's office, and we're really pleased that they did that, because they mentioned they had to work with the state's IT computer system and bandwidth and all this stuff, and so they had to work really hard with the internal state controls, but they were able to address all of these issues for us. And then there was a reference to the perceived glass ceiling within the judiciary itself, appointed judges, where there was concern that the presiding judges were assigning new judges of color some of the less desirable assignments, and having to re-educate everybody that those really aren't less desirable. They're a learning, training opportunity for new judges, and then the presiding judges then should rotate those judges into more high-level assignments.
So basically, for those of us that are listening, you handed the governor's office a checklist, and they basically did everything you asked them to.
Yeah, they did. And we had a really good relationship with the COAF. And at that point, it was Josh Grove, and we worked really closely together. Josh met with the COAF at least 4 times a year, quarterly. He would either come to the state bar or we would go to Sacramento. Every time there was a concern, we were free to call him directly. If he had questions, he would call us. So he would call Judge Brenda or myself, and he knew that he could rely on us for the responses. Anything he had a question about, we had an answer or we found it for him. So he was really pleased with our ongoing relationship.
Well, it's exciting to hear about the power of really this summit, right? That's what we're talking about, and over this next 2 months, given our new format. Let's move on to 2016. So can you quickly give us some of those same accomplishments out of 2016?
And basically, we looked at the same categories: judicial appointments, elections, the leaky pipeline, data collection, outreach and education, and the online judicial application, and so forth. And we made headway in all of those, basically with increased training on judges, increased training of the Jenny Commission, increased early education pipeline work. One additional tweak to the online judicial application was that if there was an error, you forgot something in the application, it would say, when you tried to submit, it would say error, but it wouldn't tell you where. So we got them to highlight where the error was so the person could go back directly to that part of the application and complete that and submit it. And one thing we did that was really beneficial to us, I think, in terms of the 2016 summit, we introduced a new process. It was called the wind tunneling process. It's an online format that allowed a wide range of stakeholders to write input on key issues that we were looking at. And in this instance, it was increasing diversity on the bench. We were able to expand the input and feedback beyond just the registrants of the summit. And we did major outreach and networking to the court executives, local bars, affinity bars, public interest in nonprofit groups, law schools, registrants of the summit, and so forth, because we wanted to expand the feedback that we got on these issues. It was over 10 years at this point in time, and we've been essentially preaching to the choir and moving in that direction, which was important because we were all focused on what the priorities were. But now it's time to get feedback from everybody, including those who are opposed to diversity, the issues of diversity in the bench, and not realizing the value of diversity in terms of public trust and confidence and fairness and so forth. And as a result of that wind tunneling process, they identified 6 areas that I think are important for going forward with the work that you're all going to be doing. They emphasized that we had to be really clear on how we define judicial diversity. When we were going through our summits, we limited it to certain demographic groups. But the feedback from the wind tunneling was that you have those groups as well as socioeconomic considerations, age, legal education, various practice settings, level of experiences working with marginalized communities and so forth. So there's a broader components to defining judicial diversity. So we have to define exactly what you're looking at in terms of moving forward. Also, in terms of cultural awareness, everybody agreed that cultural awareness as a selection criterion was a priority. Again, though, we have to identify and define what we mean by cultural awareness so all the parties involved can be on the same page. In terms of what data is relevant, there was a kind of a back and forth. Is it enough data to compare judicial demographics with the demographics of the attorney population, or do we need to go beyond that and compare judicial demographics to the state demographic population? The conclusion was that if we want to make any systemic changes, we have to look at judicial demographics versus the state demographic population in terms of what our goals will be. We needed to expand our engagement with youth through the pipeline and especially through social media. We needed to have judges personally go out into the community. That was a recommendation in 2011 and into the 2020, and it was referred to in the 2006 that judges need to take a more personal role in terms of getting out into the community, whether it was through the education pipeline, mentoring, volunteering, attending events, holding town halls, so that community is aware of what the judges do, what their role is, and can have a better sense of relying on them in terms of a fair justice system. And then one final thing, it's kind of it's a systemic thing, but it came up in all 3 summits. We had not addressed it, and it still needs to be addressed. It's changing the judicial retirement system. One of the barriers to attorneys from diverse backgrounds in considering application for the judiciary is that when you do with the current retirement system, they have to take a pay cut. Everybody pretty much takes a pay cut. And for a lot of the attorneys from diverse backgrounds, they also have large loan repayments and so forth. So they have to clear all that up before they can consider applying for and being appointed to the bench, because they won't have the financial resources to deal with those as well. So that we all agree was a systemic issue, and that's one thing that needs to be discussed not only internally with us, but with the legislature, the governor as well.
Wow, thank you so much. I guess I'll just say quickly, Ruthe or Judge Brenda, do either of you want to add anything? Okay, so we're a little bit behind, so I'm going to have to pinch your time just a tiny bit. And what I want to do now is, we've been talking about the summit origins and previous summits and all of the accomplishments that have been made so far. Knowing that there's more work to do, I'd like to ask you each in closing to give us, what do you think we should be focused on? Are you Are you optimistic? Are you worried? What really is the challenge and the things that you hope people will take from this? And I'd like to start with you, Judge Brenda.
All right, thank you. I'm unmuted. Thank you.
Hey.
First, I want to say I am actually incredibly gratified by the progress we've made over these past 15 years since our first summit in 2006. But quite frankly, we really have not moved the needle as much as I'd like to see it moved on the diversity front. So there's still a lot of work to do. I don't want to be a Debbie Downer, but I will say that I'm apprehensive because some of the things that have happened in the past few years caused me to question whether or not we will see the same level of progress over the next 15 years. One of the biggest changes was when the state bar decided to make some changes and basically gutted COAF and decided that the state bar should not concern itself with judicial diversity. And in addition, decided that that COAF or the state bar should not concentrate on the lower levels of the pipeline. In fact, COAF's work was limited. And this does not come as a surprise to the State Bar Board of Trustees, because I've told all of them and anybody who'll listen that I really think that was a terrible idea, because now you have diversity and professional diversity into like 3 silos. And so you have, or 2 silos or something. You have the CLA that does all of sort of the non-judicial work. You have the Judicial Council that has taken over the judicial diversity and working with CLA, and CLA was to do the summits. But with COAF and those 25 member board, we had one entity that was solely focused on diversity along the pipeline. And I do think that that now I'm afraid that kind of concentrated focus is going to harm future efforts. So and to say as well, the state bar, that really they shouldn't be concerned with the judiciary when it is lawyers who are going into these courts, that and lawyers who have diverse clients need a diverse bench. So that's one of my concerns. But otherwise, I just hope that people continue with the efforts. We need people out there who will be courageous, who will know that and just know if you start something, and you're committed to it, I think you're gonna find like-minded people. So I'm optimistic that we're gonna come up, that the progress will continue. I have just been so impressed with the governors coming along with both Brown and Newsom and their judicial appointment secretaries and their commitment to diversity on the bench. So that causes me optimism. So in any event,
Brenda.
All right, thank you.
Be courageous. I like that. Pat, would you like to share with us your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I kind of echo Judge Brenda's sentiments. One thing that I think forgot to mention that we should be proud of is that when COAF was initiating the mentoring sessions, the governor's office now has an official mentoring program that tracks what was done. So that was something that slipped through the cracks when the state bar made a shift and took the judicial diversity work away from COAFs, and now it's been resurrected through the governor's office. So we're really happy about that. I think in terms of apprehension, I'd like to see, there's a gap now, and we've kind of lost a little bit of momentum because of the changes with COAF and trying to assign to the Judicial Council and to CLA what the state bar cut out, but it hasn't been established and picked up to the extent that we were doing through COAF. And I'd like to see that happen again. I'd like to see an institutionalized entity, probably through CLA, that focuses on judicial diversity, and that we work directly with the Judicial Council. The Judicial Council is able to do as much as it can, and it has limitations, I realize that, but it could probably do more in terms of the support work and so forth. And then in terms of optimism, it's in fact the large numbers of registrants today and the full agenda that you all have put together over the next couple of weeks in terms of the issues that you need to focus on gives me optimism that you're really focused in the right direction. And hopefully a lot of things will come out of that, and you could put together an action plan that you continue to work on and assign leaders to maintain that. Because one thing I know, Brenda didn't mention it, but I think Ruthe will, all three of us are retired. But we're still working on this. At some point, we'd like to be sure that there are people who could take over the work and we can sit back and be advisors, but not the actual doers. That would be really great.
Oh, my goodness. Well, hopefully there's some people listening who will take up the mantle. With that, Ruthe, I'd like to ask you to, really close us out before we get ready for Q&A. What are your thoughts on this?
First, I'd like to thank you, Tristan, for representing CLA in this program, and you, Kathy, for representing the Judicial Council. That's a partnership that we're going to be counting on as the State Bar is no longer working on pipeline and judicial diversity. This is where it needs to happen with the two of you to make it happen. I am apprehensive because I thought that in my lifetime I would lose my mission, and I haven't. I think it's going to go on for the next generation of lawyers who I hope find that passion and that mission for diversity and for the pipeline. However, I'm very optimistic because I see a question there about the pipeline. We do have a pipeline in California. And this week, in fact, last week, the first members of our pipeline classes who started in 2011 and graduated from high school in 2014, those first members took the bar last week. And where are they headed? Those of you who are on this call who have been involved in the pipeline, I thank you. And I can't leave without asking every one of you, because so many of you are on the bench or are planning to be on the bench. They need you. They need people like you that they can look up to and see as ninth graders and 10th graders and say, look at that person. They look like me. They started like me. I can be like them. That's where judicial diversity starts. And I have to give a shout out to a few people who I saw on this list. Emily Vasquez, who's been very much involved with our Sacramento academies. Judge Elizabeth Macias, who is the chair of one of our law academies in Santa Ana. Holly Fugier, who was in at the very beginning, who has been so much a role model for so many of our Asian American Pacific Islanders high school students who look at her and go, she's really tiny, but she's so powerful. I can do that too. And Pelayo Lamas, who has been one of our great advisory council members at Oakland Tech High School. So there are people on this list right now who are so committed and so involved. And I know there are others who say, I can do that. I can inspire and motivate and help another young person, another person who is LGBT or of color or a woman, become a person just like me, have a dream, and each one of you can help them with their dream. If you want to help them with their dream, please contact any of us. Contact Tristan, contact Catherine. We have a place for you to be. We have mentoring programs. We have advisory councils. Don't let your talent and your energy and your passion go to waste. We need you.
Well, you weren't kidding, Judge Brenda, about following Ruthe. I mean, I have to say the three of you, as well as many of our attendees, it's almost like I need judicial and attorney diversity trading cards, because we'd have a whole variety of you that are the heroes really doing this work. And I thank you so much. I'm supposed to read the materials, but we've run out of time. So I'm just going to put them in the chat, the list of the things that are in the link, if you follow it, and I'll ask Lauren to share the link again. And with that, I want to invite Kathy to come back and help us with some questions.
Hi, everybody. Wow, that was such a great program. A lot of the questions that we received have been kind of worked in through your answers. So, I mean, that's always a sign of a successful panel, right? The first question we got was actually about the legal studies academies, and there was a question specifically about Judge Macias. So, Ruthe, I think you addressed that one. Yes, we're very excited. We have our advisory committee has a lot of individuals working on this. And as Tristan mentioned, If you're interested in learning more about the cafeteria to the courtroom, we will be having a pre-session on that over the noon hour on August 25th. Another question we got was that I want to just raise real quick because I can answer it. There was a question about efforts made to keep statistics for gender non-binary individuals. And so I did answer that individually, that we have not kept those statistics, but that may be something that we consider in our recommendations moving forward. So I just wanted to put that out there so that everybody was aware of that as well. So the first question I'll ask you is, do you agree that the legal profession is becoming less desirable as a career and that diversity is going to be a challenge for that reason? What are people's thoughts on that?
No.
Okay.
I think that when the students that we have, and the students that we have in our 22 high school law academies, and I think the people who are involved with it, that's our classroom. They are 70 to 90% students of color. Most of them, at least 50% of them, are free and reduced lunch, so they're many times disadvantaged. They've never dreamed or thought that they could be a lawyer, but when they see somebody that looks like them, that came through the same pathway, that is doing something that changes the world, they get inspired and fired up. So the students I'm talking to who are in our pipeline, who are coming through our high school law academies and going through community colleges and then going to our 10 undergrads and law schools, the ones that make it to the law and make it through law school, they're fired up. And that's what we need. We need them to see the people on this call so they can see that I think the law is the best generic degree, especially for me, a woman of color. Yeah, no, I'm just all hyped up on it.
And I agree with Ruthe, and I also want to caution people. You know, there was a narrative a couple, maybe perhaps it's still going on, that going to college and going to law school is a waste of money because you know, you're not going to find a job and all of those kinds of things. I think that's it's a very dangerous message for people of color, because if we don't have law students of color, college graduates, law students, and eventually lawyers and judges of color, we are going to lose the diversity. So people of color need to be out there fighting. And all you need to do is look around what's happening on a national level, look around to see what's happening with voting rights and other rights and everything, look and see what's happening with LGBTQ rights. And you know that you need somebody in the legal profession who's going to have the courage to stand up and fight. You know, I'm not getting political, from the event of January 6th, whether you call it an insurrection or a tourist visit. From that incident itself, judges and lawyers of color who understand what's at stake need to be acting on these issues. So no, it's not desirable, and it's not less desirable. I'm hoping that it's more desirable.
Just to echo, that's just the message is that, you know, our democracy is at stake. And who understands it better than communities of color, attorneys of color, and so forth. And it's time that we all just step up and encourage others to engage in this, recruit students of color to get involved in the legal profession, because we need everybody to fight for democracy.
Well, that's a great segue to our next question. With the soaring cost of law school and the crippling debt faced by many students of color, what can the legal profession do to make law school more affordable and attainable? Like, what can we do? What can the people on this call do to start to make that a reality? Because I think what we've heard from everybody is that you can't be what you can't see, right? Representation matters. So do you have any suggestions or any ideas about what we can do around that?
I think that we have to look at financial assistance, and we have to look at ways. Maybe we need to start considering free judicial education. sort of treat it like public schools, get public law schools where we don't, I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head, but we do have to make it affordable. I think we have to look at the costs and we have to make it affordable, and we have to look at programs that will allow people to pay off the debt of a reasonable time. I mean, people leave law school with $300,000 and $400,000 of debt, and that just seems to me to be a ridiculous amount of money. So I haven't delved deeply into what our options are, but I think we have to be creative. We have to be creative. We have to sit down and we have to figure out what it is we can do to make it better. Because we have to have the lawyers. You know, the story about with the Shakespeare, I forget which play it is, but the guy is dreaming about, having basically an autocracy. And so someone tells him, well, first kill all the lawyers. And at first people thought that was a joke about lawyers and how people didn't like lawyers. But what he was actually saying is that if you want to achieve becoming a dictator and stuff, you're going to have to get rid of the lawyers, because the lawyers is what stands between democracy and dictatorship. And so these days, I think we're almost sort of killing off all the lawyers, so to speak, by telling them not to go to law school, or by making it so unattractive financially. But they're the guardians of our democracy.
Judge Brenda,
Thank
I always
you.
like to correct people when they say that quote inconclusively, and I say the next line is, then we will have chaos.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and another question that came in is like, have we talked about loan forgiveness for working in state government? And I think that, goes a little bit beyond the scope of this program here, but it is something to think about. Another thing that comes up a lot I see is providing paid opportunities for students, college students and law students. I think a lot of the public interest stuff we do is focused on your ability to work for free because you care so much. So that's one way that we can begin to level the playing field a little bit to ensure access for everybody. Okay, so we have another question.
Let me add that with a new program that we're starting again now post-COVID. But what we're looking at in the same vein is starting apprenticeships and doing apprenticeships for high school and community college students in our law pathway, to give them a skill such as being a paralegal early on so they can earn. And of course, we need to look at the loan repayment program that the federal government has, which hasn't been real active in the last 4 years, but hopefully under this administration, those will start getting paid off, since many of the students who are now accessing that pot of money are 10 years beyond graduation. So federal law, and it's comforting to know that the ABA and the different state bars have been looking at this issue for a long time, because they feel like Brenda has said that we're losing the ability for students to go to law school. So when we think about specific programs like apprenticeships, so that we can give them some earning power while they are going to law school early on, and then really helping them plan their pathway through, all the way through from high school up through law school, then I think it makes it a little easier, because they don't come in thinking we're going to live on loans. There's going to be another way to do this.
Okay, I'm going to ask you 2 more questions. Okay, I hope you guys are ready for the hard ones.
Okay.
No, okay. How do we get judges to the table who don't think there's a problem? What do we do about a lot of the work we do is preaching to the choir, but in order for us to really shift the needle and keep moving, how do we engage people that don't necessarily believe that judicial diversity should be focused on, or that there's even a problem here?
I think the way we did it in corporate America with the legal profession was making it a financial benefit. And maybe that's the way we have to do it. I haven't thought this through, because but I know that in the corporate America was what brought the law firms to their knees when it came to diversity. So there must be a way for financial issues to be addressed because diversity just makes it better. It becomes a financial incentive. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I know that's how diversity started and worked in the law firms with corporate counsel. Maybe there's a way that somebody is brilliant that's listening to this can come up with a plan.
And I think that maybe we just realize we're never going to get everybody to the table. So we accept that. And I think you have to focus on the people who are coming to the table, who are willing to roll up their sleeves and work hard and be creative. There will always be some naysayers. There will always be people who will say, you're trying to give special treatment to someone, or there's no problem. You all have had for example, you've had a Black president. What more do you want? You don't really need any more voting rights. And those kinds of things where people will say it's not necessary. But if you're out in the trenches, you know what's at stake. And as Pat has said, our democracy is really at stake. We need the lawyers. We need judges to come to the table. We need judges who are capable of admitting that, no, you are not going to admit that you're racist, but at least listen to the implicit bias training, take the courses, understand that there's still some work that can be done, and that you should be open to that. And try to put yourselves in the shoes of people who are standing before you, and come to the table. If for that reason alone, to try to be empathetic to issues faced by all of the litigants coming into the court.
And then and I hate to put this responsibility on the shoulders of judges from diverse backgrounds, but it's something that you need to do to have conversations with your colleagues who appear to be adverse to the idea of the importance of diversity in the judiciary, and have those conversations. And whenever examples arise in terms of cases before them in the courtroom, to add your insight as to what they should be considering in terms of coming to conclusions as to how they're going to enter their decisions. And just continue to have those conversations, because things happen along the way where the light bulb goes on, and the more comfortable they are in terms of engaging in those conversations with you, and vice versa, perhaps the less resistance there will be to focusing on judicial diversity and the importance and value.
Yeah, thank you. I think that that's really important. And I think that that's something that we kind of all learned from all the events of this past year, right? That we have to talk about these things. We have to get uncomfortable so that we can make some change and really create the world that we all want to live in, and a legal society that we all feel proud defending and supporting. So for the last question, we have them. It's first, they want to thank you all for being trailblazers for change and diversity on the bench. And what change do you hope to see today based on the progress that has occurred from your efforts so far? So let's end with some hope. Like, what, if in your perfect world, when you come back in 15 years to see where we've been in the next 15 years, what do you guys want to see? What are your hopes?
I would like to see the judiciary reflect the rich diversity of our population. I would really like to see population parity. That's what that is what I would hope. Or if there's going to be overrepresentation, nothing wrong with overrepresentation of judges of color on the bench and women on the bench. We get African Americans certainly get overrepresented in the prison system, so why not be overrepresented in the justice system as well? So that would be my hope.
My vision is a diverse profession, and that's what I've always said, is a population of lawyers that reflects the population that we serve. And the only way we can get a diverse judiciary is to have a diverse profession. So that's why the pipeline, I think, is so, so important. I'd like to go down to 4th grade where the achievement gap is, and start training them and telling them and acquainting them with the legal profession in 4th grade, but at least we're in 9th grade. And I would love to see everybody who is still listening call us and get involved.
I'd like to see, in addition to what Judge Brenda and Ruthe have said, those are really important, but also I'd like to see a consistent, focused effort by all of our affinity bars, because you're in direct contact with potential judicial applicants, and also our local bars that have that contact as well. And that effort is strong, consistent, and ongoing. And that's going to be a way that you can recruit, identify the potential members of the judiciary, and provide the support that they need.
Well, thank you. And at this time, I just want to thank everybody for attending. I want to thank our panelists for really taking us on this journey and really helping us to kick off the 2021 Judicial Diversity Summit with a look back at where we've been, all the great work we've done, and where we are going forward. I want to remind everybody to please join us for the remainder of our pre-sessions that will be happening on Wednesdays, noon to 1, and for the actual summit, which will be on September 14th, the 21st, and the 28th. And all the details to register and the programs will be in the chat. So thank you, everybody.